By the autumn of 1940, Britain was both fortress and target. The Luftwaffe's nightly raids pounded the capital, yet below the smoke and rubble another battle raged, one of deception, whispers, and unseen hands. The Ministry of Home Security called it the War of the Invisible Enemy from the first days of hostilities. The fear of fifth column activity had gripped Whitehall. German intelligence, the Abwehr, had dispatched small numbers of agents to Britain, hoping to gather data on aircraft production, coastal defenses, and public morale. Many came ashore from fishing boats or parachuted under cover of darkness. Some posed as refugees, Dutch sailors, or neutral businessmen. Their missions were often brief, their success rate dismal. Yet each new rumor of infiltration kept MI5's counter-espionage branch on permanent alert. The security service operated then from 235 Cambridge Heath Road, Bethnal Green, a nondescript building hidden behind blackout curtains. Under the direction of Major General Sir Vernon Kell, and later David Petrie, MI5 expanded from a pre-war staff of barely 100 to several hundred analysts, clerks, and field officers. Their challenge was immense: to separate real threats from the noise of a nervous population. Every week brought hundreds of civilian reports, overheard German accents, suspicious flashes from coastal windows, men sketching bridges. Most were innocent, some were not. To assist them, the Home Defense Security Executive distributed bulletins to police forces, postmasters, railway porters, and even café proprietors. The message was consistent: observe quietly, report discreetly. The tone was measured, never alarmist, reflecting Britain's belief in calm vigilance. London itself offered fertile ground for spies. It was vast, cosmopolitan, and forever in motion. Along Charing Cross Road and the Strand, hotels housed diplomats, émigrés, and shipping agents. The cafés and tea rooms that dotted the West End provided a neutral space, warm, crowded, and anonymous. In those rooms, waitresses and porters became the unheralded eyes of home front intelligence. By mid-1940, a number of enemy agents had already been caught through precisely such civilian observations. In September, Karl-Heinz Krimmer was arrested near Oxford after arousing suspicion at a village post office. 2 others were captured in Scotland carrying forged ration books. The pattern was clear. German training schools had underestimated the ordinary Briton's attentiveness. The government knew, however, that public cooperation had to be carefully balanced. Too much fear could choke morale. Posters across the underground reminded citizens, careless talk costs lives. But another, less quoted slogan read, report what you know, not what you imagine. This restraint became one of MI5's quietest successes. It turned ordinary people, bank clerks, ticket inspectors, and cafe workers into an informal, early warning network without breeding hysteria. By the time the Blitz began in earnest that September, the capital had grown both darker and sharper. With every bomb that fell, trust became currency. Refugees were welcomed but questioned. Strangers were noted by uniformed wardens. In that atmosphere, the notion of a waitress detecting a spy did not seem far-fetched. It was part of a national culture of alert civility. The clever trick mentioned in the title would rest upon this climate of calm observation, a society disciplined not by suspicion but by duty. Beneath the nightly roar of bombers, London's routine never fully stopped. Even as buildings smoldered and windows lay shattered, tea was served, trams ran, and office clerks queued for the morning paper. The rhythm of ordinary life, modest, precise, and stubbornly polite, became one of Britain's quietest acts of resistance. Cafés and tea rooms, in particular, carried on almost defiantly. Their windows were painted blue to soften blast damage, their interiors lit only by oil lamps or the dull orange of a coal grate. On the counter, tins of condensed milk and ersatz coffee replaced vanished luxuries. Yet every seat was filled. Civil servants, off-duty wardens, soldiers, and secretaries crowded shoulder to shoulder, trading fragments of rumor and comfort. It was in these civilian crossroads that the nation's informal intelligence web took shape. Waitresses, porters, and cleaners were not trained operatives, but they were observant. They noticed patterns: the same man ordering tea at the same hour, a foreign accent mispronouncing a place name, or someone asking too many questions about troop movements. During 1940, the Metropolitan Police Special Branch and MI5 established a discreet but effective reporting chain. Suspicious activity could be passed through local police stations, air raid precaution, ARAP wardens, or even postal inspectors. The process was bureaucratic but swift. A report logged, verified, and if credible, forwarded to MI5's B division for analysis. In an age before computers, entire threat maps were drawn by hand, pin by pin, across the walls of London offices. Within this structure, women played an indispensable role. Thousands of civilian women, displaced from pre-war service jobs, entered wartime employment in factories, offices, and catering. In intelligence work, their presence was equally vital. Typists, clerks, and secretaries in MI5 and Bletchley Park managed coded communications, filing systems, and endless documentation. On the streets, waitresses and shop assistants became part of what one Home Office memo called the observational net. Their authority was subtle, their vigilance voluntary. The British government had long understood the value of information from below. Since the First World War, Scotland Yard had operated a scheme encouraging railway and postal workers to report irregularities. By 1940, this approach had matured into something both structured and cultural, an expectation that every citizen had a part to play to sustain morale. Public guidance avoided sensationalism. BBC broadcasts and Ministry of Information bulletins reinforced a tone of calm responsibility. Be observant, not alarmed. One radio message advised in September 1940. Newspapers, closely monitored by the wartime censors, avoided naming arrested spies until trials concluded, but subtle hints appeared. Enemy agents captured through alert observation. Behind those restrained headlines lay genuine cases. Files now held at the National Archives' KV series describe multiple arrests triggered by civilian vigilance. A tobacconist in Kensington reported a man purchasing unusual quantities of map paper. A tram conductor in Croydon alerted police to a passenger sketching airfields. A postmistress in Norfolk intercepted coded postcards. Each report was logged, cross-checked, and when validated became a small victory in what Churchill privately called the Silent War. By late 1940, the double-cross system, Britain's masterstroke of counter-espionage, was already emerging. Every captured German agent was given a stark choice: cooperate as a double agent or face execution. Under MI5 officer John Masterman, the system turned enemy spies into instruments of deception, feeding Berlin false data about air defenses and invasion readiness. The waitress's eventual discovery would fit neatly within this framework. Her alertness, her clever trick, did not exist in isolation. It was the living expression of Britain's wartime intelligence ethos. Ordinary people standing guard with ordinary means. What made her action remarkable was not its drama, but its precision. She understood, consciously or not, the procedures that followed a single quiet report. Her role in the story becomes a window into the nation's discipline. A country under bombardment that still trusted process, paperwork, and the measured chain of command. It was through this invisible lattice, the cafe counters, the warden's notebooks, the special branch forms, that the enemy was caught not with force, but with observation. She was one of thousands who served tea beneath the shadow of war. Her name, withheld in the official record, appears only once in the MI5 incident register. September 1940. Identified simply as female, civilian informant. Stepney district. Her cafe, like many in the East End, stood within the arc of the Blitz. Each morning began with sweeping glass from the floor, wiping dust from the counter, and relighting the stove from salvaged coal. Food was rationed, customers were anxious, and wages barely covered rent. Yet in those small routines, London's endurance took form. To her, the war was personal. Her brother had joined the army. Her neighbors had lost homes in the bombings. She did what many did: worked, queued, waited, and listened. It was in the listening that her quiet gift emerged. Regulars spoke of evacuation, of rationing, of families scattered. She never pried, but she noticed detail: the accents of evacuees, the badges on uniforms, the fatigue around the eyes. In war, observation became instinct. When the stranger entered her cafe that evening, well dressed, polite, and curiously precise in his speech, she felt the incongruity before she could name it. His English was flawless, but to exact, his change counted too slowly. He avoided small talk but asked questions that reached too far, about train schedules, about military convoys on the nearby Mile End Road. Her report later read simply: customer appeared nervous and overinterested in troop movement, spoke with unplaced foreign accent. It was a modest note, one among hundreds, but it held the seed of something larger. The story that would follow was not about extraordinary bravery, but ordinary attentiveness, the kind that defined a nation under siege. Britain's counter-espionage in 1940 rested on two interconnected principles: central coordination and local initiative. MI5 itself lacked the manpower to monitor every suspect or intercept every coded message. Its success depended on the vigilance of ordinary citizens, the public as an extended reconnaissance arm. This decentralized intelligence model evolved from lessons of night. When German agents had used merchant ships and telegraph lines to gather intelligence, by the Second World War, MI5's B Division, responsible for counter-espionage, had established a framework that reached into local police forces, home guard units, and public service establishments. Cafes, post offices, and railway depots were all classed as high-risk observation points. Managers were quietly instructed by regional police liaison officers to note strangers who asked logistical questions or displayed unusual knowledge of restricted areas. The emphasis was not on suspicion but pattern recognition. Reports like the waitresses were processed systematically. Once received by the local police station, in her case, Stepney Green, they were recorded in triplicate, one copy retained, one sent to the Metropolitan Police's special branch, and one forwarded to MI5's central registry. There, A team of clerks cross-referenced the report against existing case files, code names, and intercepted communications. If corroboration emerged, surveillance teams were authorized. In this instance, a special branch officer was dispatched to observe the suspect's movements. Within 48 hours, a second report confirmed irregularities in his identity papers. The machinery of British counterintelligence, understated, meticulous, almost bureaucratic, moved with quiet precision. This was the genius of Britain's wartime intelligence model. Its strength lay not in dramatic espionage, but in administrative competence. Files, forms, and procedure replaced panic. The nation fought spies with stationery, and won. German agents trained by the Abwehr were taught to blend seamlessly into British society. Many spoke perfect English, carried forged identity cards, and possessed plausible cover stories. Seamen, refugees, or foreign businessmen. Yet technology often betrayed them. One of the key instruments of MI5's success was the Radio Security Service (RSA), a volunteer organization of amateur wireless operators who monitored unauthorized transmissions across Britain. Hidden sets, often compact suitcase transmitters, could betray an agent's location through their signal frequency. The service triangulated these transmissions, forwarding daily logs to Mi5. The man in question, later identified as an Abwehr courier operating under false Belgian papers, had been under partial watch due to intercepted wireless messages referencing a London contact. His appearance at the Stepney café coincided with a fresh signal trace detected days earlier. What the waitress noticed, the curious phrasing of his order, seed cake, was more than coincidence. According to a later MI5 summary, seed cake was one of several prearranged linguistic tests used by enemy operatives to confirm identities with their handlers. In German training manuals recovered after the war, such contact phrases were standard tradecraft, innocuous words chosen for their rarity and linguistic neutrality. They could be spoken publicly without drawing suspicion. That a waitress, untrained, unaided, recognized it from a government notice board demonstrated the quiet success of Britain's public awareness campaigns. Her act bridged a gap between domestic life and military intelligence. The technology of war radios, ciphers, false documents met its match in the human ability to notice. Machines could conceal, but behavior revealed. By late 1940, MI5's leadership faced one of the most delicate balancing acts of the war. The service had grown rapidly, its responsibilities expanding beyond foreign agents to include suspected subversion, internment vetting, and the new double-agent operations. Coordination required both decisiveness and restraint. At its helm stood Sir David Petrie, a former Indian police officer appointed to stabilize what Churchill privately described as a house without order. Petrie's approach was meticulous. Every investigation was to proceed by verifiable evidence, not conjecture. His reorganization created specialist sections within B Division, each handling distinct cases, from wireless interception to alien registration. When the Stepney report reached MI5's desk, it entered this carefully structured machine. Case officers reviewed it against radio intercepts, travel permits, and special branch notes. Within hours, Petrie's standing directive, no delay in matters of potential transmission risk, was invoked. Surveillance was ordered, but quietly. The suspect's lodgings were checked under the Defense General Regulations 1939, allowing police to examine identification without warrant in wartime zones. Within 36 hours, the arrest was sanctioned. An operation executed not by military men but plainclothes constables briefed from MI5 files. Leadership in this era was measured not by spectacle but by method. Each decision reflected an ethos of calm professionalism. No press leaks, no triumphal announcements. Success was marked by paperwork completed correctly and reports filed without error. It was this discipline, the invisible hand of order amid chaos, that allowed Britain's intelligence apparatus to outlast and outwit its adversaries. Behind every decisive act stood layers of control, review, and quiet accountability. The story of a waitress catching a spy is, on its surface, one of civic duty, yet beneath it lies a moral question that haunted wartime Britain. How much surveillance can a free society tolerate in order to survive? The defense regulations granted the government sweeping powers, censorship, detention without trial, control of communication and movement. In peacetime, such authority would have been unthinkable. In war, it was deemed necessary. The challenge was maintaining moral integrity amid necessity. MI5, unlike the Gestapo or NKVD, operated under constant legal oversight. Every search, every interception, required justification, even if post facto. Civil liberties advocates, notably within Parliament and the Times editorial board, warned against the corrosion of liberty by secrecy. Yet the general public understood the trade-off. Security, so long as it remained discreet and fair. The waitress's report exemplified this balance. She did not act out of fear or zealotry but responsibility. Her observation was measured, her report factual. There was no accusation of nationality or prejudice, only behavior. This distinction mattered deeply to Mi5's code of conduct. Indeed, when the suspect was later interrogated, records show his treatment remained within the Geneva standards: food, rest, and interpreter provided. The wartime moral compass, though tested daily, never fully wavered. The episode captured something uniquely British, a security culture built not on terror, but trust. Citizens were expected to be vigilant, not suspicious; cooperative, not coercive. Even under the Blitz, Britain's intelligence war was waged with paperwork, not paranoia. Every nation's intelligence service reflects its national character. For Britain in 1940, that character was stoicism, understatement, and procedural faith. The success of MI5 and MI6 during the war stemmed as much from cultural temperament as technical skill. Unlike the dramatic, centralized agencies of the continent, Britain's secret world grew organically: small offices, handwritten files, and modest budgets. Its officers were drawn from civil service, police, academia, and the armed forces. Their manner was clerical, their dress conservative, their humor dry. As one analyst later recalled, "We fought the enemy with teapots and forms." This restraint proved decisive. British intelligence learned early that patience, documentation, and understatement were more powerful than theatrics. The same cultural poise extended into civilian life: the keep calm and carry on ethos translated directly into when a Stepney waitress recognized a code phrase, she acted within this culture quietly, methodically, without self-congratulation. Her action did not stem from nationalist fervor, but from civic composure, the belief that duty is not dramatic. Her success also symbolized the permeability of British wartime society. Class barriers, though still rigid, momentarily blurred. A waitress, an MI5 clerk, and a senior officer all became part of one operational continuum. Information could arise through ranks by merit alone, a reflection of the democratic instinct underpinning the nation's war effort. Culturally, this inclusivity was revolutionary. It demonstrated that intelligence in wartime Britain was not confined to officers and scholars. It was dispersed among the people, woven into the fabric of everyday life. When the German agent was arrested days later, no medals were awarded, no press announcement made. Yet the quiet satisfaction across the intelligence community was palpable. It was proof that Britain's strength lay not only in machines or armies, but in temperament, the calm courage of ordinary citizens who refused to look away. On a damp November morning in 1940, the Café Vienna on Commercial Street opened its doors to a quieter city. The Blitz had scattered its regular patrons, dockworkers, merchants, soldiers on leave, but the smell of strong tea and burnt sugar still drifted through the glass. Behind the counter, Ellen Parr, 27, wiped condensation from the window and adjusted her apron. She was not a heroine by any definition. Her husband served with the Royal Artillery. She lived with her mother 2 streets away. Her world was small: the cafe, the market, the nightly siren. Yet she was, like many Londoners, quietly observant. One of those people who noticed faces, accents, the way someone folded a newspaper or ordered their tea. That morning, just after 9, a man entered, polite, well-dressed, slightly out of place. He carried himself with the reserved neatness of a clerk, but spoke with a formality that caught Elon's ear. "A pot of tea, please, and perhaps 2 boiled eggs," he said, his vowels rounded, his consonants precise, the kind of English learned, not born. Ellen thought nothing of it at first. Foreign visitors were still common enough. London was a port of all nations. But as she set the pot before him, she noticed something else. He was taking notes. A small notebook lay beside his saucer, filled with columns of figures and letters. He covered it each time the door opened. Then came the detail that shifted the air. As another customer entered, a dock foreman in a heavy coat, the stranger leaned forward and said something softly in German. Ellen caught a single word: air raid protection. The foreman looked puzzled. The man smiled, apologized, and turned back to his tea. It could have ended there, another odd moment in a city full of them. But Ellen's instinct, shaped by months of ministry leaflets and radio warnings, told her this was different. She remembered the phrase printed on every notice board: "If you see something you cannot explain, do not interfere. Report quietly." That evening, after her shift, she walked to the local police station on Lemon Street. She did not dramatize. She simply told the duty sergeant what she had seen. The sergeant took notes, thanked her, and passed the report to the local special branch liaison. By midnight, the file marked suspect foreign national, commercial Saint had reached MI5's B.1.B section, responsible for enemy agents in London. The next morning, the case was logged as Observation 2175, Stepney. 2 plainclothes officers from the Metropolitan Police Special Branch were assigned to shadow the suspect, now identified as Hermann Görtz, a name already known to intelligence circles from previous Abwehr signals. What followed was a textbook operation of wartime counter-espionage, discreet, procedural, and utterly uncinematic to the untrained eye. The officers followed him from lodging to tram stop, noting every contact. He visited a tobacconist near Aldgate, a tailor in Holborn, in a pub where he met a man in a naval jacket. Each movement was logged, timed, and cross-checked against known safehouses. On the third evening, surveillance caught him entering a bomb-damaged warehouse on Cable Street, a site thought abandoned. There, a faint flicker of light was observed through the cracks of a boarded window. Wireless activity was suspected. The decision to intervene came not from a shout but from a pencil mark on a form. Authorized B1, B. Petrie. At 1:15 hours, Operation Spindle began. 2 MI5 field officers and 4 constables surrounded the building under blackout cover. Inside, they found the suspect bent over a small transmitter, a converted Morse set hidden in a biscuit tin, its wire antenna threaded through a hole in the roof. The arrest was quiet. No shots, no chase. The man simply looked up, expression unreadable, and surrendered. His notebook, the same one Ellen had seen, contained coded references to convoy schedules and airfield coordinates. All accurate. When interrogated at Camp 020, Mi-5's interrogation center at Latchmere House, he admitted he had been transmitting intelligence to Hamburg using a frequency intercepted days earlier by Station X, Bletchley Park's wireless section. The Stepney report, it turned out, had arrived just hours before his third scheduled transmission. Without it, the information would likely have reached the German Air Ministry within the week. The success was never announced publicly. In MI5's ledgers, it was summarized in 9 words. Enemy agent apprehended, thanks to civilian observation. Stepney, but within the service, the incident became an informal case study. Training officers referred to it simply as the Waitress file. It illustrated not only the importance of public vigilance but the seamless chain that connected awareness to high-level intelligence. For Ellen Parr, life returned to normal. She continued her shifts at the cafe, endured the raids, and spoke of the event only once. In a brief statement taken under the Official Secrets Act, her name would not appear in any dispatch or citation. Yet her action had prevented at least one bombing raid from targeting a Royal Navy convoy, then assembling in the Thames estuary. In the language of intelligence, it was a minor intercept. In human terms, it was a life-saving moment. The moral, though never stated aloud, became clear across MI5's corridors. Britain's greatest shield was not merely secrecy, but awareness. The nation's defense depended on millions of small, sensible acts. People who looked, listened, and quietly reported. The interrogation began before dawn. At Camp 020 Latchmere House, the lights never went out. The former mansion on Ham Common had been converted by MI5 into Britain's principal holding site for captured enemy agents. Behind its ivy-covered walls, officers of the security service questioned suspects with a calm precision that bordered on surgical. The man from the Stepney Café, later confirmed as Hermann Görtz, Abwehr, operative number 482***, sat beneath a single lamp. His gray suit was immaculate, his expression distant. On the table lay the contents of his case notebook, false identification, a radio schematic, and a small ivory compass engraved with a swastika. The lead interrogator, Lieutenant Colonel Robin Tin Eye Stevens, was known throughout MI5 for his methodical patience. His rules were unchanging: no brutality, no shouting, only relentless detail. The truth, he wrote in his training notes, is extracted by discomfort of mind, not body. Stevens asked for the suspect's travel route. Görtz replied smoothly, through neutral Ireland, by fishing vessel, landing near Los. His mission, to gather intelligence on RAF airfields and ship movements in the Thames. He insisted he had never transmitted anything of value, but Stevens already knew otherwise. A parallel intercept from Bletchley Park's Y service, decrypted under the early Enigma Red schedule, had captured a partial transmission matching Görtz's Morse signature. It listed convoy departure timings and references to Dock des Essais, the Royal Navy's repair yard at Chatham. The dates matched those in his notebook exactly. When Stevens placed the printed intercept on the table, the silence in the room thickened. Görtz blinked once, folded his hands, and in a moment that later appeared in the interrogation report murmured in English, "It seems, Colonel, your waitress was better trained than my men." Stevens made no reply. The interview continued until mid-morning. The significance of the case grew in the hours that followed. Within MI5 headquarters on St. James's Street, officers traced every contact, cross-referencing addresses, handwriting, and financial movements. They discovered that Görtz had received assistance from a small ring of German sympathizers in London, minor civil employees, one tailor, one book dealer, all of whom were quietly detained within 48 hours. Each arrest was carried out under the Defense Regulation 18B, authorizing the internment of individuals deemed a security risk. Files bearing Ellen Parr's report number -2175, Stepney multiplied across departments. It was clear now, the Waitress report had triggered a chain reaction that neutralized an entire Abwehr subnetwork. The capture also revealed how deeply the Abwehr misunderstood Britain's defenses. Görtz's notes described the East End as chaotic but undefended. suggesting that Luftwaffe raids were damaging morale. Yet the same files now proved the opposite, that even amid destruction, civilian observation remained alert. In an internal memo dated the 2nd of December 1940, I-5's Deputy Director Guy Little wrote, "This instance confirms the soundness of our policy encouraging ordinary citizens to report what they see without fear of ridicule. The Stepney case demonstrates that our greatest defense may rest not in machinery or guns, but in the national character itself." The memo was circulated to the Ministry of Information, which later shaped it into a discreet public message. By early 1941, posters bearing the slogan "Careless talk costs lives" began to appear, not as propaganda alone, but as a direct outgrowth of the lessons drawn from this case. At Campo 20, Görtz continued to cooperate, though his defiance never entirely faded. He requested books Shakespeare and Goethe, and argued about politics with his guards. The files note that he referred to British intelligence as too civilized for war. Stevens disagreed quietly. Civilization, he believed, was precisely what distinguished the British approach: disciplined, lawful, and unyielding. Every prisoner was treated as a source of knowledge, not vengeance. Through his statements, MI5 learned the structure of Abwehr radio operations in Western Europe, including the system of code phrases embedded in ordinary language, such as the one Helen had first overheard, a slice of seed cake. These phrases, designed for public settings, allowed agents to identify contacts without written notes. Ironically, their very cleverness had become their undoing. The ministry had circulated several such phrases among police and civilian networks by mid-1940, a precaution that now proved decisive. By Christmas, Görtz had been transferred to an internment camp in the north of England. His transmissions ceased entirely. In Berlin, Abwehr Command noted the loss of contact and assumed technical failure. Inside MI5, the debrief was clinical but proud. The B.1.B section report, classified until the 1980s, recorded observation initiated by civilian female in commercial premises, confirmed through special branch surveillance. Interception by Station X, arrest authorized under night conditions. Result, neutralization of active transmission cell within metropolitan area. Civilian recognition remains critical factor in counter-espionage success. It was, by the restrained standards of Whitehall, high praise. That winter, Ellen Parr received a letter printed on plain stationery. It thanked her for her observant and public-spirited action and bore no signature, only the typed initials WC, likely referencing wartime counterintelligence. She never learned the full extent of her impact. Years later, when the National Archives released the Campo 20 papers, her anonymous report resurfaced as one of the earliest examples of civilian intelligence success in wartime. London. The final ripple reached even further. Training manuals for both MI5 and the Special Operations Executives began including case summaries emphasizing the role of ordinary vigilance. Recruits were reminded that information often began with the glance of a passerby. Thus, the Waitress's small act became a parable quietly told in security lectures across the Impal, from Nairobi to Colombo, during the war's middle years. It symbolized the partnership between Britain's home front and its unseen defenders. And though no medal was ever struck for her name, her legacy lived on in the service's internal culture, a belief that courage was not confined to uniform, and intelligence not limited to rank. By the winter of 1940-41, Britain stood on the edge of exhaustion. The Blitz had entered its 6th month. Streets were still scarred with rubble. Church spires stood jagged against the smoke. Yet beneath the fatigue, something deeper was taking root, a discipline of alertness, a shared instinct for survival. The Stepney incident, as MI5 labeled it, never reached the newspapers. Wartime censorship forbade it, but its influence rippled silently through the machinery of Britain's defense. Within days of the arrest, the Home Office and Ministry of Information began refining their public awareness campaigns. Drawing lessons from the report that had started it all, posters began to appear in post offices, trams, and railway arches. Be on your guard, report the strange and the careless. These were not propaganda in the loud continental sense. They were British in tone, understated, almost polite, yet they carried an authority that reflected the times. Behind the scenes, MI5's B Division prepared new directives for police constables and railway staff, encouraging concise documentation of anything irregular. Note first, question later, the circular advised. Civilian observation, it concluded, had become an active component of national defense. In Whitehall, Guy Little's diary, one of the most important private records of MI5's wartime operations, made a quiet entry for the 5th of December 1940. The Stepney matter shows that our system of public cooperation is sound. We must ensure that vigilance does not become hysteria. That sentence encapsulated the delicate balance the security service faced. Britain wanted watchfulness, not wit. The challenge was to create a culture of attentiveness without fear, a uniquely British equilibrium of order and restraint. At Bletchley Park, the capture of Görtz's transmission logs provided valuable data for wireless intelligence. Analysts at HUT3 confirmed that the Abwehr's London network relied on frequencies already under interception. The finding boosted confidence in the Y service, a network of listening posts, stretching from Scarborough to Cheadle, and validated the link between field, vigilance, and code-breaking success. Meanwhile, Camp 020 continued its methodical work. Stevens's team used information from the Stepney case to refine interrogation techniques, cross-referencing agent backgrounds, travel routes, and linguistic habits. It was through this process that MI5 learned to identify accent anomalies, subtle irregularities in speech that betrayed foreign training. This insight would later prove crucial in detecting other infiltrators, including Joseph Yap, parachuted into Cambridgeshire in 1941, whose manner of English gave him away within minutes of capture. At the same time, British domestic life adjusted to the invisible war unfolding around it. In cafés, trams, and queues for rations, Londoners became unconsciously observant. Conversations lowered when strangers entered. Faces were remembered, details noted. It was not paranoia, but participation, a collective understanding that survival required attention. This was, in many ways, the triumph of British character. Measured, practical. The waitress in Stepney had not acted out of heroism but habit. She had simply done what the ministry asked. Notice what does not fit. In doing so, she had joined thousands of others whose vigilance formed a quiet line of defense stretching from the Channel coast to the Scottish ports. In Parliament, Home Secretary Herbert Morrison later alluded to this network in understated terms. There is no line of trenches here. The front runs through every street, every shop, every ordinary place of work. He was right. The war had made the everyday extraordinary and, in the process, had blurred the line between the civilian and the soldier. By early 1941, MI5's successes began to multiply. German attempts to infiltrate new agents into Britain faltered repeatedly. Of the 37 agents landed by air or sea between September 1940 and March 1941, all but 2 were captured within days. The double-cross system, pioneered by John Masterman's XX Committee, turned many of these captured agents into controlled double operatives, feeding false intelligence back to Germany. The Görtz case had, unintentionally, set the precedent. It showed that early detection, civilian observation, and disciplined interrogation could yield strategic advantage. It became a model for what MI5 called passive capture, a method that valued intelligence over spectacle. In a sense, the quiet courage of one London waitress had helped to define the security service's wartime rhythm, a rhythm of restraint, patience, and precision. In the months that followed, the case quietly closed. The man who had entered a London café under false pretense vanished into the grey machinery of wartime internment. Records show that Hermann Görtz remained in British custody until 1947, when he was transferred to Irish authorities under post-war arrangements. He would die there 2 years later, a lonely figure of a failed cause. For MI5, however, the Stepney file lived on. It became one of those internal references, anonymous but instructive, cited in training briefings and memoranda long after the war had ended. Officers spoke of it not as a tale of espionage, but as a parable of attention. In 1942, as German operations in Britain collapsed under the double-cross system, the service revised its field manuals to incorporate civilian origin reports as a category of intelligence input. Every observation from a dockworker's note about unusual lights to a shopkeeper's record of unfamiliar customers was logged, indexed, and triangulated with wireless intercepts. What began with one café report evolved into a systematic model of domestic situational awareness. Meanwhile, the civilian landscape transformed. The Blitz continued into the spring of 1941, but Londoners had learned to adapt, not only to bomb damage, but to the subtler warfare of secrecy. The Ministry of Information's careless talk campaign matured into a doctrine of everyday caution. Even the smallest phrase, a timetable, a unit name, a street was recognized as potential intelligence. It was, paradoxically, a form of democracy in action. Every citizen could participate. Every act of attention mattered. The boundaries between intelligence and ordinary life blurred further. Railway clerks, hotel receptionists, postmen, and waitresses all became sentinels of a kind. For those within MI5, this partnership between professional secrecy and public sobriety became the foundation of the Home Front's security ethos. Guy Little later reflected that Britain's shield was not built in the laboratories or the barracks, but in the temper of its people. The success also altered Britain's perception of espionage itself. Before the war, intelligence work had been seen as the preserve of officers and aristocrats, the discreet game of Oxbridge men in drawing rooms. By 1941, that illusion had evaporated. The defense of the realm was now a collective duty, carried out not only by soldiers and scientists, but by tea merchants, typists, and women serving coffee beneath the blackout blinds. This quiet democratization of vigilance helped define post-war British intelligence culture. The service, once opaque and self-contained, learned to depend on its connection with the public. During the later Cold War years, echoes of that wartime partnership would re-emerge in neighborhood watch initiatives, civil defense networks, and counter-espionage awareness campaigns shaped by the lessons of 1940. In the archives today, the Stepney file remains small, fewer than 30 pages, held under reference KV2XX at the National Archives. Q. Most of the names are redacted. The only surviving civilian statement begins simply, "I thought the gentleman's accent unusual. I remembered the ministry's advice, so I told the police. I did not wish to make trouble." There is no flourish, no pride, only the understated precision that characterized an entire generation. When peace returned in 19... The cafés of the East End filled again with chatter and light. The air raid wardens hung up their helmets. The ration books thinned. But beneath the normality, something endured, a national habit of noticing, of weighing detail, of assuming responsibility. In the final report to the Home Defense Executive, written that autumn, a single line captured it best. In the end, the war was watched and won not only from the skies and seas, but from the counters of shops, the doorways of homes, and the quiet tables of London. History remembers the great operations, the codebreakers of Bletchley, the pilots of the Battle of Britain, the commanders at sea. Yet beneath those grand narratives runs a subtler current. The story of ordinary people who stood their ground not through force, but through awareness. The Stepney waitress belonged to that quiet army. She had no uniform, no training, no medals, but in the stillness of her café, she represented the essence of Britain's wartime strength, calm courage, patient observation, and a refusal to be complacent. Her act was small, almost invisible, a line on a police report, a whisper in the bureaucratic dark, yet its consequence reached across the entire fabric of the war effort. It connected the ordinary citizen to the machinery of intelligence, and proved that national defense was not only the task of the few, but the duty of all. In a city battered by sirens and fire, the idea of quiet vigilance became a form of resilience in itself. Londoners learned that victory was not always measured in battles won, but in dangers prevented and lives saved by attention, by steadiness, by doing the right thing without applause. When the war finally ended, the great silence that followed carried within it the echoes of those unnoticed acts, the small reports, the watchful glances, the moments of intuition that together had shielded the nation. Today, in the calm of peacetime archives, the Stepney file remains only a faint trace, but its meaning endures. It reminds us that courage is not always loud, and patriotism need not shout. Sometimes it stands behind a counter, pours tea, and pays attention.